Hi everyone, and welcome back to Storytime. Now today we're looking at the third true story from the life of Joseph. Do you remember Joseph? Pete taught us last week that God helped Joseph understand Pharaoh's dreams. Do you remember that? And Pharaoh's dreams, we are told, meant that there were going to be 7 years in Egypt where there was going to be loads and loads of food. And then there were going to be 7 years with hardly any food at all. And we're going to find out what happened next. So Joseph knew that there were going to be 7 years of lots of food. So he spent 7 years collecting all the extra food in Egypt. So they had loads and loads of food. And then it happened just as God said. There were 7 years with loads of food and then 7 years with hardly any food at all. So in Egypt, they'd stored up their food, so they had loads. But in Canaan, where Joseph's family were from, they hadn't known about this. So they hadn't stored their food and they had hardly any. And Joseph's family were running out of food. So you know what they did? They went to Egypt, where Joseph was, to buy food. And they came to Joseph, but they didn't know it was Joseph. And they bowed down to him and said, "Can we buy food from you because we're going to die?" So Joseph sold them the food and he sent them back to Canaan. And then the brothers came back and they brought more food. And this time Joseph said, "I am Joseph." He showed his brothers who he was. Now, how do you think the brothers felt when they realised it was Joseph who was in charge in Egypt, who'd sold them the food? They were very scared. You see, do you remember what Liz told us a couple of weeks ago? Joseph's brothers had tried to get rid of him. They pushed him into a hole in the ground and then they'd sold him. They thought that he was dead. And now here he was in front of them and powerful, in charge in Egypt. Now, I don't know about you, but if my brothers had pushed me into a hole in the ground and tried to sell me, I would have been very, very cross. But Joseph wasn't like that. He forgave his brothers. He told them not to be afraid, that he was their friend. And so the family were back together again. Now, let's think about that. Was it just that Joseph was a nice person? Well, I don't know if Joseph was a nice person or not, but Joseph actually tells us why he forgave his brothers. I'm going to read it from our Bible. Joseph said, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to do what is now being done, the saving of many lives." You see, Joseph knew God. He was a friend of God's. And he knew that God can take even bad things and turn them into good things. You see, because God is all powerful and because God is always good, he can work through bad things to make them good. And we see that most of all when Jesus died on the cross. People meant that to be a really, really bad thing. But God meant it for good, so that he could make a rescue happen that was even bigger than the rescue of Joseph's family from being hungry. It was the rescue from sin and death. So we're going to sing and remind ourselves that our God is a great big God who can work even through bad things to make them good. If you'd like to, you can join in with us as we sing in a minute. Our God is a great big God.
Our God